All right, g'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis. My name's Pietro. Uh, I don't have Max with us today, but I have a very special guest, someone who we've been fans of as the show for a very long time, and someone who most of the viewers of this show, I'm sure, had heard of long before we ever started making any sort of attempt at a podcast. We've got with us today the so he's a political commentator, he's an independent journalist, he's a filmmaker. Now, most famously, he skyrocketed to renown and popularity for his on the ground footage of the anti-lockdown, anti-mandate, anti-COVID, anti-everything stuff in 2020, and he's been soaring ever since. So, a very warm welcome to the show, Mr. Rukshan Fernando. How you going?
Good, Pietro. Thanks for having me on, mate. And you forgot to add in there wedding photographer as well. So
Well,
perhaps
and
I'm most well known for amongst my detractors.
yeah, well, and that's I mean that's kind of the first thing that is the most interesting part of your rise is that you went from a wedding photographer to something very different in quite a short amount of time. And I guess most of us who have followed you generally, like, we've come to follow you at some point after the initial explosion, because very difficult to get on the ground level of following someone before they erupt to notoriety. So most people, I guess, don't really know the story of how you rose from or rose, how you went through such an enormous kind of change in scope and change in career almost. So the first thing I'd love to do is get your story of how the real Rukshan was born into the thing that he has become today.
Yeah, look, I've always been someone that's been interested in politics and sharing my opinion and writing stuff, and particularly amongst my own social circles on social media. And that Real Rukshan page is actually called Rukshan Fernando, which is the name that I have for it now, Rukshan Fernando. But and I actually made that in 2003, I believe, or way back, not 2003, sorry, about 8, 9 years before actually, getting it going into 2020. But it's always kind of been sitting there, that page. And what really happened was during this whole pandemic, COVID stuff that was happening, I was sharing my own opinions amongst my own friends on Facebook. And one video I made in particular, for some reason, this was around something to do with Brett Sutton, and he's talking about masks. And I don't know if we're allowed to say this stuff. We probably are now, but Brett Sutton was saying how masks are, not effective. And this is very early on when they're trying to keep masks for the health workers. So, and I kind of spliced that up with a few news bites about people wearing masks and how kind of the message had been changing in the space of about a month, because it changed so rapidly from health officials saying that, oh no, masks don't work, to now saying everyone's got to wear one type thing, right? So I showed that video in a snippet on my own personal Facebook page, which was public, open to the world, and that kind of had 500,000 views very rapidly on my own personal page, which is obviously problematic for many reasons, because I have a private life, I have my friends, my family, I have all of this stuff going on, and also a lot of the public now coming onto this page to talk about something at the time which was very novel in a way, because it's very new for people to actually discuss these things. But everyone's arguing about it, and on my page, and I was like, oh, maybe I should, take this type of, this content that I'm making, or my opinions, and put them somewhere separate, and kind of lock down my profile a little bit because it's problematic. So that's what I ended up doing, and that's when I changed that name from Rukshan Fernando initially, because I didn't really want people to look me up as Rukshan Fernando, to the Real Rukshan. And for anyone wondering why it's the Real Rukshan, I am a Trump fan, so he's the real Donald Trump, and a lot of the conservatives,
Okay.
a lot of the conservatives in America have the real or real instead of saying official for their at symbol. So I just put the Real Rukshan, and that kind of, obviously, when you make these things, you don't know what's what's going to stick. And later on, I found out that people actually thought Real was my real first name, and they were like, "Oh, is that like French or something? What is that?" Nah, it's just Real Rukshan, and my name's actually Rukshan Fernando. So that's kind of how that name and that page, initially on Facebook, started up. And from there onwards, I would continue to make this political satire. Really, it was more of a mockery of what was happening. Early on, I was making a lot of memes, which was, the free time that we had, the forced free time during, lockdowns and isolation at home. Obviously, me being someone who is in the creative field, in the editing field, editing videos and photos, for me to actually take a video and manipulate it in terms of adding, like a clown face, whatever it is, like to that, and making a bit of comedy out of it, was something that was easy for me to do in that spare time. So I made a lot of political satire, and I made some videos of, Daniel Andrews talking to Dr. Phil, like kind of splicing it together. And those videos really got a lot of attention because I think people were looking for that type of humor. Humor in a way, memes in a way, sometimes, even if you're from, doesn't matter what side of politics you're from, you can maybe find, humor in these jokes. So I think a cross section of the public started watching me for that type of content very early on. But things, it wasn't all fun and games, right? So this lockdown from, sit at home for a couple of weeks and watch Netflix and you'll be back at work, turned into a ongoing saga of months and months and months, especially for us here in Melbourne, Victoria. And as things got more serious, obviously the commentary became a bit more serious in terms of what I was discussing, because now we had people, their lives are being destroyed. We had issues with the quarantine, the lockdown hotels. We had all types of government incompetence. So once you start talking about these kind of topics, things become serious. And around me as well, things were becoming more serious. You had people on the street protesting, and I was at home watching some of these protests on television. And for me, very early on, it didn't kind of add up, because a lot of the anxiety that I was sensing from people in the comments online, and a lot of the discussions just with my own friends and family who aren't really into politics, everyone was kind of suffering these same effects. So this portrayal of protesters early on by the media as these, hardcore radicals that wanted to, like they're just like conspiracy theorists, and they're being crazy. It was like, no, I think a lot of people probably feeling like this, but these people are actually expressing it on the streets because they're frustrated. And that's what initially led me to, step out onto the streets and cover some of that stuff as well, which, after a few months of doing that, probably like a year, it was really towards 2021 where people really started noticing my protest work, especially when I started doing more live streams. But I had been doing that for a few months on and off, covering these protests. So, like you said, initially, not many people may have seen a lot of that stuff that I was doing, and was very kind of contained within the community of people who were paying attention to this stuff. But I think a turning point was really that time period around the CFMEU protests, the stuff
Yeah.
on the Westgate Bridge, the stuff at the shrine. So that just really the climax of all of that frustration that had built up in our community around Victoria. That's when a lot of people really switched on to that, because by that point, I was live streaming and there was like, 30, 40, 50,000 people, sometimes 80,000 people watching these streams, because everyone is glued to it at home, seeing what's happening out in the community. And I think a lot of people resonated with what they were watching, even though they couldn't be out there themselves on the street. And maybe they agreed with some of the aspects of it, maybe they didn't agree with all aspects of it, but they felt that type of frustration. And I think they were watching really their community speaking to them through these type of videos, and finding some type of communication that was different to the stale press conferences you get every day, where there's Brett Sutton and Daniel Andrews and his crew telling you that, oh, this today there's this many things, and in a few weeks we'll have a roadmap and this and that. I think people were sick of that, and they just wanted to maybe see a bit more of the reality of what people were actually feeling, coming through and being represented in the media. So that's kind of where Real Rukshan, or Rukshan Fernando as I'm known now, that's kind of how um, my journey kind of went in that direction. And obviously since then, all types of other issues I've covered as well. But that is really a lot of people, if they know me or have heard of my work, it's usually around that lockdown time that people became exposed to the kind of work that I was doing.
Yeah, yeah. So the first time I came across you was that first CFMEU protest, which, like, alone, that was one of the most insane. Even just to think back on it, one of the most insane things that has ever happened in kind of Australian history. There were union members attacking and trying to like hurt the boss of one of the biggest unions, who had just lied about them on the radio not 10 minutes earlier after speaking to them. Like, it was just like a reality TV show in real time. That was the first time I came across your work, and I think you're probably, I would dare to argue, to blame for why the next day there were so many more protesters, because I know for myself and at least a couple of people who I went with, I came the next day to the protest on the Westgate. I don't think I ever would have known about how important this kind of thing was if I hadn't watched it the day before. I remember watching that and I thought, okay, this is it. This is the point where people who are fed up with all of this are standing up. Now I know where to go. Now I know what to do. Now I know that there are the normal people ostensibly who are on the ground and who are fighting. I also remember, given that was the first time I'd ever watched your stream, something I found really interesting about that first CFMEU protest was your commentary, because as far as I knew, you were just a guy who was holding a camera and pointing out all the things that were happening, and I didn't really know much about your views. And then as it sort of got more intense and the police started sort of lining up and pushing people in, you would talk about like, oh, look at this authoritarianism. Oh, this is just unjust. This is unfair. I thought, oh, wow, that guy's really cool. He's probably a libertarian or something around a libertarian, is what I remember thinking that at the time. So I was wondering, did your views evolve much as you saw stuff on the ground, or were you you went out because you thought this thing and were confirmed true, or did your views evolve as you saw this stuff happening?
Look, I think my views definitely evolved, and it's one of these things, right? Because I was aware very early on that presenting stuff without too much commentary is perhaps a better way to treat this type of thing, because people have different views and different opinions. I myself have different views and different opinions. Now, I don't necessarily agree with all those protests that I was covering, and I don't agree with everything that people were saying. So there is that element to it, and you kind of want to present things without adding your own commentary to it. But this was such a unique situation, and we have to understand that in that context. Because today people will look at me at other protests and they'll be like, "Well, why aren't you giving that same type of commentary?" And what I try to explain to people is that, in this instance, the journalists were also locked away in their houses, right? The journalists were also, the media were also facing the same type of situations as the public that they were reporting on. We were all in this together, to steal a phrase from the government of the time, right? So that was very true. Like, all these things that were happening would impact everyone, including journalists, including media. So, I found a lot of my views around, what I was saying came from the complete sense of disbelief that I started to build over time in the way that the media and journalists and photographers and so on were treated by the government. I found it offensive that in our Western countries they would work so hard to limit access of this information to the public. So and that really turned for me, where I became a bit more vocal about my own views, was when the police started visiting my premises, coming to my house. I think they came 2 or 3 times, and that really made me more aware of the fact that, as much as I don't want to be disparaging of what the police are doing and all this kind of stuff, at the end of the day, like, they're not my friends in this particular scenario. There's a limit. You have to understand that, you have to know your place as a journalist or a representative of the media when you're working in this place, and you have to, protect your rights in that instance. So, I would, print out what's that press? There's a press council here, and they have some charter or something on their website, and I'd just keep that in my pocket with me in case the police troubled me. So I really believed in these type of ideals, and maybe that's naive, but I believe that we still have that in the West. And I thought, it's only if we don't believe those things that the police can run all over us and stop us from doing this. So when they come to your house and tell you, don't go out to this protest to cover it, they're doing that, but they don't really essentially have the power to do that. They can pretend, and some people might listen to them, but I didn't believe that as journalists in the West we had to listen to that stuff, and I believed that I should be out there covering it, because I thought, regardless of the consequences, it was more important that we did that. And I think that's what really started to inform and shape my beliefs about what I was seeing. And so some of that commentary was really around the incorrect portrayal, I believed, of the people that were there. Yes, all protests, you tend to get some bad apples that are attracted to these protests for all types of different reasons. But just from my interactions, people were there because they were just to lack of a better term, they were pissed off. They
Mm.
had enough of what was going on, and and then to see those type of people who were ordinary people treated badly by the government, I thought it was more than okay for journalists or myself in that position to have a bit more commentary and actually say that this potentially should not be happening on our streets. That this is not our Western tradition. That is not normal for police to be shooting rubber bullets at people protesting in Victoria who aren't being violent, who are just standing there, and that perhaps the justifications that they're giving for saying that protests aren't allowed are laughable to begin with, and why should people be adhering to them? So I was able to give those type of opinions, and then secondly, my opinions also came from the fact that I would go to a protest, I would go home, I would turn on the mainstream media coverage of that protest, and it's completely warped. And I thought there was a need for me when I'm covering these protests to kind of especially when there's lots of people watching, to be able to set that at least from what I'm seeing, to give that context from what I'm seeing at that time. I'm not saying it's the exact correct thing of how it should be portrayed or whatever, but I'm saying from what I can see at the time, it's a diverse protest. There is no baby neo-Nazis, as Bill Shorten claimed the day after the CFMEU protest, that there were people that were Indian there. There were, I talked to some Sikh people in that live stream, and I asked them, I was asking people, are you a Nazi? Because I thought it was good to be able to correct those type of real time things that were being said by the media, by politicians, because they're taking the easy road out. I thought they're just trying to play the usual game that they play with these things, and tell people, hey, ignore what you're seeing with your own eyes, and you can see it, but ignore it all because they're all these baby neo Nazis. It's that's where it came from, and I just thought there was a sense in me that there was a bit of a duty to kind of give that context as well, rather than letting other people apply that context to it later for their own purposes.
Yeah, I think look, you're absolutely right that a lot of people, for them, that period was realizing that these institutions such as like the police and the mass media and whatnot, that we trust in a day-to-day life, and probably like we can trust most of what they're saying to report news nowadays, or at least half, and then do your own research. But we realized that when it, like, there was a moment where it became really intense and really important, and the pressure was put on. When push comes to shove, they're not on your side. They are willing to completely vilify you, as the police did in interviews and with the rubber bullets on the street. And I had the exact same experience. I remember, the Westgate protest. Like, you're walking among these people who are just friendly, everyday cross section of society, and you've walked with them all day. And then the moment we get into the car, ABC radio is saying that neo-Nazis protested through the streets of Melbourne, and you just realize, it's like, oh, okay, that this isn't just spin. Like, these are our enemies. They are targeting and attacking us the way you would target an outright enemy. And I think obviously what was really attractive about your way of your style of journalism was that, because it's this grassroots, on the ground, real time footage, there's no possibility for spin. Like, yeah, you can make a comment in the background, but you're not in control of the images that you're looking at. Like, you're watching it the same as anyone is watching it. And for the first time, people were looking at this thing and they were like, as if they were there themselves, like, oh, this is what it looks like without the spin. And in a way, it just laid bare all of the lies in just this one simple act, this one simple, like, the simplest, just, I'm recording what I'm seeing. This unravels so many of the lies that are in front of me. I don't know if you necessarily know the answer to this, but I'd be interested to hear your opinion. Western democracy, this idea of the free society, is founded on the idea that the press is supposed to be free. The press is supposed to be able to investigate things and check things, and they are the thing that checks and balances whether our state is becoming authoritarian. because that's their duty as the free press. It's part of free speech and everything. And yet we saw that they were so captured, so unilaterally captured, barring, real grassroots examples such as yourself. Why do you think they have become so captured? Why do you think we're in this situation that we are in?
It's interesting because, like you said, this whole idea about the press being the fourth estate, and that's something that I believe in, and I think it's a really powerful tool that has shaped our world throughout history. And I believe even today, and even during that time, depending on the type of story it is, they are willing to be the fourth estate. You're seeing that, and depending on who's in government, you see this particularly in America. Depending on who's in government, the press is all about being the fourth estate. Particularly during Trump's administration, I remember very clearly how how dignified they were in the fact that they are the people who are keeping the checks and balances on the ruling class. So they play this role, and it's interesting that they became so selective during that time. Interesting in the sense that that I understand from the perspective that it's like a health crisis, and there is a responsibility for media to be responsible. I understand that they have this role to play in society, and they kind of the window into the press conferences and the government, and they play this role. But when you then mirror that against the fact that they were also doing these advertisements for Pfizer, or they have these relationships with these multinational pharmaceutical companies and other companies that are involved in this, they have all these relationships with the government. The government spending advertising dollars on their thing. When that happens, okay, maybe that's okay as well. We live in these capitalist societies. Okay, fine. But then you just as an observer, you start seeing these people just talking about the one thing, and that's when it becomes problematic. I think when they start silencing experts, when they start using censorship against ordinary people just having a different opinion, because that's all of a sudden that's dangerous to have a different opinion. Like that's just I don't think we should accept that in the West, and it's sad that so many people did accept that, and it's even more disheartening that so many people within the media and so many journalists accepted that without actually publicly questioning how is it okay that we're censoring these doctors and these people, because how can the people from the government, how can they be so correct? Of course, they should be other opinions about what they're saying. It's just one administration. Like, how is Fauci? How is he the gospel, like this messiah of everything he says and everything the US says or everything the WHO says? How is that correct when you have these alternate opinions coming from other experts? We lost a lot of that, and I think that's what's dangerous, and that's the problem. And they use this whole thing about it being a health crisis as the reason to do this, but I don't think that excuses the fact. I think a crisis itself requires multiple points of views, multiple opinions, and multiple ways to deal with it. And perhaps we may have been in better shape if we had more of a robust debate, if we had more people protesting, if we had more governments responding to protests as well, not just being so authoritarian in the manner that they went about their decisions. Because now we look back today with hindsight, in many ways, we look back on these decisions and most of them seem absolutely ridiculous. Right now that we have these experts who have analyzed some of these decisions that were made during that time, they're like, oh, it was unnecessary, a lot of that stuff. But even during that time, there were already experts saying that it was unnecessary. It's just the governments, the media, the journalists, they weren't willing to listen to those opinions. So that's when it's dangerous, when you have this this kind of groupthink develop between these very powerful organizations, which are in the media, between the government, and then you start silencing people using the one platform that we did really have, which was the internet, this social media, our own social platforms where we can communicate with each other outside of the media. Once you start silencing people there as well, you're fully cutting off society from having just a normal everyday debate about an issue that they're having right now. And they fully wanted to control the narrative during that time, and I think that's what was most dangerous. And they don't always do it. They're not doing it today. They're not doing it on multiple other issues. But for that particular issue, they felt that the only thing that they could do was control every single facet of how we get our information.
Yeah, I mean, I remember all the experts agree, except for the ones who are not allowed to talk. I mean, yeah, no shit. If you silence all the experts that disagree, yeah, you have consensus. It's really easy to get consensus that way. I think, look, I don't think it's a controversial statement at all to say that they got everything, if not everything, very close to everything wrong. And a lot of that has become kind of dismantled in the years that follow, because as the tension eases and as the blame kind of shifts and as people become less interested in talking about why things happened, yeah, it's easy to say, oh, actually, okay, we admitted that was a bit heavy-handed and this, that, and the other. But I mean, on its face, if you remember the pressure with which they told us this in the first place, like that should be a massive wake-up call of what they are willing to do in order to control the narrative. As you said, you know, at the moment where they can, where it matters most. I wanted to ask. So, I mean, you're well, actually, sorry, I did want to ask actually, because I remember there was this was something that I expected to happen, and I don't think it ever did. And if it did, I must have missed it, because there was all this censorship, and we know now that you know, through the Twitter files that were released with Elon Musk, that Twitter was very much captured and did the bidding of the US government, especially Facebook, very much so the same. I think Mark Zuckerberg admitted on Rogan that they sort of culled certain stories and put less priority. So, I mean, these social media networks and companies and stuff who were obviously doing the government's bidding, and they were advertising, you know, the vaccine mandates and the stuff and all the rest of it as well. I was really surprised that your live streams didn't get shut down, and I was wondering whether there was ever a push for that, whether you ever caught wind of that, or if they really just let you show what you showed the whole way through.
Look, it's interesting because after that period of time, like after I kind of grew my platforms and all kind of stuff, that's when I started getting a lot of the strikes and the restrictions. So it was really like a few months after that when it wasn't more so. I don't think they were worried about. I don't think they were worried about people seeing what was happening. They're worried about people like calling them out on it, um, in posts or in articles and stuff like this. When some of the, you know, discrepancies were coming up about some of the data with the vaccines, or, you know, some of the effectiveness of certain things, and it was becoming more obvious that not everything was told to us exactly how it was. uh, Very early on, especially during the time where they were still promoting vaccination as something that you have to do, get your booster, all this kind of stuff. They were very trigger happy in terms of censorship around content related to that. But typically, I didn't see too much restrictions on straight live coverage of protests. Particularly Facebook, they've always kind of allowed this kind of live streams of protests and stuff. But there was a push, of course, to get my profile banned and get me removed. But I was very much aware of that as well, and I was seeing other people around me get their profiles removed and deleted and stuff, and I understood why they were getting their profiles removed and deleted. There is a tendency to kind of to fight back against these systems, but I think we have to understand that Facebook, these platforms, it is their platform and they can remove you. So if you don't play their game, as righteous and virtuous as you may believe that you are, they will most likely remove you. And it's worse not to have a voice um, than to like have a voice but no one can hear you. So I really worked very hard not to get myself removed from these platforms. So a lot of the times I was very careful in terms of not going beyond their community guidelines where possible, especially during live streams and things like this. So I think that's how I kind of survived that period. But the period straight after that, where I started questioning things a lot more, I got strikes. So my page was suppressed and suspended for about almost 12 months following all of this. So a lot of my growth and a lot of the kind of people's interactions, it was only until like 3-4 months ago that all kind of came back to me after all those strikes lifted. So there was that does exist, but it's only if you really want to push them. And I think a lot of people pushed them and got banned. And unfortunately, they shouldn't have got banned for what they did. But at the time, like that was the game that you had to play to exist on these platforms. And we do that today, right? You're probably careful in terms of what we talk about on YouTube. There's certain ways we discuss certain topics, and you don't use names sometimes. You mention it vaguely, or you got to be like, you're on these platforms. There's only a few places like X and Twitter where you can still today speak freely on a lot of these topics. Rumble, for instance. So I kind of played that game because I think you have to make sure that you're there, and that people who are on the fence potentially on these views also have access to your content and material. I don't believe in echo chambers. I don't believe in, having a Telegram group and just talking to them and, being happy about just people that agree with me, listen to me. I want people to, debate me and contest my ideas, and also people who don't like my ideas to see what other people who do share these same kind of views are saying as well. So, platforms like Facebook and YouTube, it's where the masses are. It's where people with lots of different views and opinions are. So I always work very hard to exist on these platforms because I believe, it's the only way you're going to reach a broader, wider audience that in these instances, sometimes, having their opinions shaped by what you're showing might be more beneficial than influencing people who are, in an echo chamber on Telegram or Rumble or something like this.
Yeah, look, I think the idea of echo chambers is actually very harmful to like the libertarian insight in all of this, which I think look, I'm a libertarian, so I should push the libertarian insight in all of this, which I think is that if you're in an echo chamber, you're constantly surrounded by your views, and you kind of put the de facto opposite side as people who have that kind of opposite view. But at the all the while, it is this government that overarches both of you, which uses this division to kind of ignore both of you and continue as the status quo and how all of that goes. And as long as we're stuck in these circles and talking about how bad that other side is, there's no way of realizing that kind of greater truth, if you want. So I think it's super important that this breaking down of echo chambers. I've had lots of friends who have been you kind of step into their world and talk to their friendship circles, and you think you don't live in reality. Like you guys live in this kind of
Yeah.
weird, fake reality. So I did want to ask, what, because your meteoric rise to notoriety and all of this came with suddenly having hundreds of thousands, if not probably millions overall of eyeballs on what you were talking about, and ears on what you were seeing. And even though, I mean, at best you may have like disguised it as kind of like I'm just an independent journalist, I think your views, if anyone was paying close attention, knew that you were being critical of the powers that be. And I think that certainly made me like watching you as well. What was it like on like a personal level, coming to terms with all of a sudden, because we all know that like, if once all these people are seeing you, that a lot of that is criticism, a lot of that might even come in the form of threats, and really sort of that fringe crazy element of people who think online I can say and do whatever I want. And for someone who's not used to it, as I'm sure you weren't before it all erupted, what was that like on a personal level, going from just being yourself to suddenly having this world around you that wants to tell you how to live, and not how to live, but wants to tell you everything wrong with you?
Yeah, definitely the public interest in what I was doing. I was obviously never experienced something like that before. But in terms of having kind of my set opinions and arguing with people, or getting criticism from people, it's something that I've, for a long time, like I said, I've been interested in politics, and I've always had certain views. And I remember very clearly during the 2016 presidential campaign for Trump, when I was very openly saying, "Oh, I think Donald Trump seems like he'll make a difference." You know what I mean? On social media and Facebook, and in my community, we're across a lot of people who are in this kind of intelligentsia, this academic. Everyone's a doctor, everyone's a lawyer,
Yeah.
an accountant, everyone's got like certain set beliefs, and they think very highly of their political opinions. So I would always kind of cop stuff for having views that people thought maybe a bit more out there. And especially after Donald Trump won that election, I remember a lot of people blocking me and deleting me because I was like, oh, this is great. And I was boasting about how I made some money off it as well, because I put a few $1,000s a bet towards Trump winning, and back then it was good odds, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
Hillary was meant to win. So all of that kind of, rubbed people the wrong way. And I've always been getting this kind of criticism from people, and not really threats, but, friends disowning me and all this kind of stuff. So I was somewhat used to that. But this was a whole new thing, right? When all this COVID stuff went down, because, it's not just people's own opinions where they, might not like Donald Trump, for instance. we're being told now by governments, by media, that if you're pro-vaccine or something, you're a good person. If you're anti-vaccine, you are like the devil killing grandma, right? You are evil incarnate. If you are one of these people, if you're one of these people on the street, you're evil. What's worse is if you're one of these people who are promoting these people on the street, and that's what they accused me of doing by filming these protests, that I was somehow making this stuff legitimate, giving them a voice and all this kind of stuff. So I am, even worse in many ways, because I'm feeling this, right? I'm creating more and more of this. So, to cop that criticism that came with that was very different, because that's when I got some random phone calls from people. They were like, "Oh, Rukshan, so disappointed in you. You're just letting down the community. You're just making all this kind of stuff, and we can't really be friends anymore." And like, on another level, it's very different to people like having a political disagreement with you and blocking you for a little bit on Facebook or something like this. This is like very personal now, because people are very offended, and they want you to know that they feel like people that would normally never want to let you know these things because they'd keep it to themselves, but they want you to know that they don't like you. So it was a lot of that. But on the other side of that, there was a lot of strangers who would approach me at protests or on the street publicly and thank me. And to this day, I'm in a very kind of public style job in terms of my interactions with random people, being a wedding photographer, wedding videographer. So I get to see a lot of different, groups of people from different parts of the world, and ethnicities and all this kind of stuff. And to this day, people randomly comment to me like, "Hey, Rukshan, I just want to tell you, thank you. We watched the live streams during that time, and it had a really profound impact on me. I've had people holding my hand at weddings and crying because they're like, oh, like just to see me, not because of what I did, but because they're just remembering that time that they went through. So people have been emotionally traumatized and deeply impacted by this. And there are people who appreciate what I've done as much as there's people who hate me for what I did during that time. But during all of that, I've learned to accept the fact that, people are not going to love you universally for anything. It comes with the territory. If you're in a public facing type of journalism or giving commentary or giving opinions, you have to accept the fact that, you're putting yourself out there. It comes with the territory, and you have to accept many elements of it. Now, there were instances where I went, following the CFMEU protests, I went to the police because I had to file a few reports because of just very sketchy, random phone calls I would receive, with threats to not turn up to the next protest. So, for instance, after the first CFMEU one that night, I received multiple threats on my phone, to not come the next day. And these are like heavy set voices. I don't know. Like I saw all sorts of stuff at the CFMEU. There were bikies there. There were all sorts of people, security. Like I know the history of that institution. So I don't know. I don't know who's called. I'm not making any accusations, but I don't know who's calling me. So in those instances, I had to go to the police and do those things because I thought that was the right thing to do. Not because I was scared, but because I thought I had to report these things and continue to work. I wasn't going to let it stop me, but I thought I had to report these things. So there have been instances like that where I know that, you do find yourself in situations where you are potentially in harm's way. But a lot of the times, it's also just people being complete idiots, right? Unfortunately, my phone number was available because, again, I have a website. We have weddings and all this kind of stuff. So people knew all this information about me. They know where I live almost. They know my offices, everything. So that's the whole kind of thing surrounding what I was doing at the time. So yes, I was worried about some of this negativity, but overall, I was very confident and positive in terms of what I was doing. And I thought I was doing the right thing. And I thought I had to continue doing that despite the negativity.
Yeah, look, I'm very glad you did. I personally would have been mortified if I'd go, knowing the CFMEU a little bit. I would have been terrified of people calling me. So I think it takes a lot of guts to keep turning up. I wanted to, so probably all of us who went against the kind of mainstream regime of all the mandates and lockdowns and stuff and spoke about it in our circles had some friends who called us names and wouldn't speak to us ever again. Did any of them, or did many of them, kind of come crawling back, or have come crawling back over the last 2 years, and admitted they're wrong, or tacitly admitted they're wrong, or just, don't want to talk about it anymore and are willing to look over that sort of stuff now?
Not necessarily for me. Like, yeah, people that I don't really know have been like this. They've kind of had a different, not so much they agree with me, but more so like, oh, a bit more of an understanding of what I was doing during that time. I think a lot of people that know me personally from that time, um, I think they just didn't like the fact that I was getting this attention. Maybe like, like who does this guy think he is, Rukshan?
Yeah.
Stick to his weddings, whatever he does, and he's out there talking, speaking like he's some sort of authority. That's not what I was doing, but that's the interpretation of people, right? Those things can't be helped. So a lot of those people have not, and that's for a large variety of reasons. But yeah, like in my industry, for instance, I had a lot of issues very early on with the wedding work that I was doing. So we had a lot of emails coming through from clients who were, you know, we had booked weddings obviously, but they were canceling very early on after they found out who I was. Venues asking questions about things, like, am I going to come there and create some scene? Like, you know what I mean? It was just like,
Yeah,
what?
yeah, yeah.
Like these, I'm talking about the bigger venues, like the big
Yeah,
venues
yeah, yeah.
that they didn't want to have anything to do with someone like me. Potentially, maybe it's some bad press for them, right? Because there were a few instances where during this time there were a few times where restrictions were eased and weddings were back on. So it was in that climate, right? We had some like high profile weddings that we do as well, and some of the people turn around very nicely, very respectfully, but the whole, we can't really be associated with your brand because it's not good for our brand and that type of thing, and like all this kind of stuff. So even during that time, with the wedding business, I went on there and said, we're working in weddings. We traditionally in the wedding industry, we work with people from all backgrounds, all
Mm,
ethnicities that don't necessarily agree on politics. And there's all types of issues that people have to get past, whether it's, same-sex marriage or whether it's differences between Hindus and Muslims, but, somehow love finds a way and people get married. So this whole idea for me, this whole concept in the wedding industry of being like, oh, if you're vaccinated or not vaccinated, that's somehow an issue now when it comes to marriages. I'm like, guys, this sounds really like weird. It's like corporate stuff that has nothing to
mm,
do with like typically like this kind of artistic creative fields where you're against all this stuff, right? You like push back against this kind of nonsense because it's all about free love and everyone's everyone's equal and all this kind of stuff. But I had to make that clear on one of the posts on our Instagram page for our business that we accept everyone, that we work with everyone, and that's how it's been like that for a long time. So I'm not going to change that.
mm.
So I didn't really care then that I would be losing clients and stuff like this. But I know over time, some of these clients, other ways have come back to us, and I don't know if it's like respect, but they kind of understand and they've gotten over that. They've gotten over that. I think a lot of people were shocked into this like we discussed before, that you have to hate these people, that somehow they're trying to kill you. And I think a lot of people really took that very much to heart, and in the way that they treated people around them. And we saw
Mm.
that with people being refused service to all types of businesses. And it was a very, I think, disgusting time period in our country and in our state's history. And what's even more disturbing is that it was promoted by the government of the time. This kind of segregated society, this kind of concept that this is okay to behave in this way. They fully celebrated in some instances these celebrities and stuff, so it was normalized.
Mm.
I think a lot of people have moved away from that, so they've come back to their senses. So in that way, yes, to answer your question, some people have become more, amicable towards their relationship with myself now.
Yeah, well, that's good. And I'm you can't get even like within a single family for everyone to agree on their political views. So how you'd expect, something like a professional that you're hiring to do a job to need to align with your views. I think that speaks entirely to the fact that, yeah, it was like everyone was brainwashed to this, nth degree. And I think it also goes to show that as much as we would like to deny the fact that in the modern world, with all the access to technology, with all the access to information, to everything, that we're above this sort of primitive, medieval, or World War II style susceptibility to propaganda. I think we've shown now that we are not. Like, as a society, we are not. If you push us a little bit, if you control a few of the main things that we look to trust as sources, we will do exactly the horrible things that the government needs us to do in terms of alienating people, in terms of shutting people out, in terms of thinking that people are, you know, neo-Nazi man babies who hate you and want to kill your grandmother. Like, we are not above that as humans. And I think that's an important lesson for our generation, you know, people nowadays to learn, which I think maybe we thought we were above it, but we really, really are not. But I wanted to ask, so we've talked a lot about the COVID stuff, and I think that's obviously very interesting. As I said, I think it has lessons that we can't unlearn as much as people are trying to forget the COVID experience for the most part. I wanted to kind of talk about a couple of things that are happening a little bit more recently. So recently, I'm sure you've seen there's been the pay dispute between the police and the government, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, because now I understand, like, you not completely disparaging of the police, but we saw firsthand a lot of the things that the police themselves are willing to do to their fellow citizens when they get told to do so. So I wanted to get your thoughts on the pay dispute and how you look at it, and whether there's anything that any kind of message behind it that we need to take away.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate for the police here in Australia, and in particular in Victoria, that they're so unpopular, that they don't have the support of the community. I don't believe they do. This is coming from different parts of the community. I think they've really alienated themselves as, you know, firefighters, paramedics. If you tell people about them, and people will be like, yeah, you know, we're for those guys.
Mm,
But as soon as you bring up kind of police in Victoria, especially, people have all types of different reactions, and usually it's in the negative. So
mm,
when it comes to something like this pay dispute, a lot of people are ridiculing them and mocking them. There are people who are on, you know, the far left, who are already ACAB. They hate police anyway.
yeah.
These people, you know, they don't deserve any of this stuff. You know, who do they think they are? And now we're seeing more and more people who are, you know, center on the right, conservatives, liberals, whatever. You know, they're more so like, oh, the hypocrisy of these people in the police to say that they will not, you know, they will stand up to the government. They will show you where the speeding fine places are. They won't
Mm,
find people. They're saying they will, you know, write stuff on their cars, and they're protesting about all this stuff. And you start to see, like, where were these people? Where were these ethics and morals from these unions and the police people when they were asked to do all manner of, you know, dehumanizing stuff to their fellow citizens? During that time, they willy nilly did it. There was almost no, really, besides a few, like, um, few police officers that took a stand publicly. There were very little that actually said, we, you know, we're not willing to do this as a police force. They did all manner of things that we would consider really unlike police in the West. Like, you know, we talked about shooting rubber bullets at the shrine. Same kind of things happened. They're just the extreme instances, but, you know, going to people's homes, fining people for just ridiculous things during that time. They did all of this, and a lot of that hasn't been. They've never come out and said sorry. At least the brass, the administration, they've never really publicly apologized for any of it. The fines, as far as I know, are still there, even though they keep dropping a lot of the bigger ones in terms of the fines that they've revenue raised off. Really, that's
mm,
still what for? Like, all of that was almost complete nonsense. But here they are talking about a pay rise, and, look, feel sorry for us. And I think there's very little people in our state that feel sorry for them, and that is coming from someone who is, you know, very much a part of Back the Blue. I highly respect law enforcement. I think they have a really hard job to do, a necessary job that they're doing. And it's important that people who are in the front lines like this are looked after, paid well, that they have safety, that they have good family lives. Like, all that is very important to me. But I'm also seeing the hypocrisy in the manner that they're
mm,
approaching the community. I really believe the police in Victoria have lost the trust of the community in our state. And it really goes down to the arrogance and the ego and the way that the leadership, especially people like Shane Patton, carried themselves. Their relationship that they portray with the community is nowhere near the reality of the relationship that we see, the symbiosis almost between them and the state. Like, they're
mm,
so closely connected in the manner that they act, and we saw that during the pandemic time. That really, this is not a community police force. This was a state police force, enacting the will of the state against the ordinary person. They weren't protecting people's rights; they were protecting the rights of the state in many times. Like, that's how it was perceived. and many arguments can be made academically, perhaps, as to why they did what they did and the laws around it and the rules around it. But as you're seeing today, the police force, they're willing to bend these rules for themselves to increase their pay. So, as an ordinary person, you got to ask you questions. If you can do it for yourself to increase your salary, why can't you do it for the community that you are meant to be protecting? And I'm very comfortable asking that question, and I'm very comfortable, calling out the hypocrisy and even at times mocking them for this. And they only have themselves to blame. And if anything, some of these members perhaps could stage a large protest against their own administration for making them do what they did during that time. But, that's all. It's never going to happen. They're never going to understand what happened during that time deeply impacted the public's perception of policing, at least in Victoria, for a long time to come.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many sort of connected facets to this as well, because so I mean, look, as a libertarian, we look at, the big conflict in our society is between the power of the state versus the rights of individuals. And in that moment where the police showed we are completely on the side of the power of the state when it actually matters, and we will continue to be this, and your rights come second, if the state tells us that they come second. Well, we don't have rights then. If the state gets to choose when our rights apply, then we don't have rights. So I think it's kind of they're asking for empathy now. Hey, look, we can't afford to feed our families. We can't afford to, maintain the kind of lifestyle that we expect as Australian citizens because our wages are too low. But the thing that we were denied so much in that period was the same empathy from them. So I mean, that level of hypocrisy is very difficult to ignore for anyone who was on the outside of the mainstream like us. Also, the simple irony that, I mean, we're all feeling this enormous inflation at the moment, and we all know. I mean, varying people disagree on certain aspects of it, but it's broadly accepted that a lot of the cause of this inflation was the spending caused by the lockdowns caused during COVID, which were unnecessary, and they were only possible because of the military arm of the state, which was the police. The physical branch that allowed these things to happen. Because if there was no police locking us down or enforcing the lockdowns, all of this couldn't have happened. So there's so much of it that is so closely tied with this one group, and it just seems very ironic now that they come hat in hand and try to play the peacemakers and all of that.
Mm.
There's so much kind of going on constantly. I feel like since COVID, and since sort of paying much closer attention to politics and the powers that be around the world, I feel like there hasn't been a break. Like, we went from COVID to the Russian war to hyperinflation to there's a US election now to they're trying to arrest Donald Trump, to the war in Gaza, to the Israel-Palestine. All that. Like, once you start paying attention, there's so much kind of going on and happening that it's hard to kind of keep tabs on the broad direction. But I wanted to ask you, so given everything that we're seeing, given everything that you've seen as a journalist and a journalist outside the mainstream, which I think is important, are you optimistic about the direction that Australia is going in, or are you more worried than optimistic?
I would say I'm more worried being more optimistic. There's been glimmers of hope for our country, and I thought the result of the Voice referendum was one such occasion that perhaps when we all really start focusing on what something means and really pay attention to the politics around it, perhaps we make the correct decisions. Now, people will disagree with that, of course, but in my view, that was a glimmer of hope. That's how I see it. But in general, I don't think this country is heading in a good direction, and that's not purely because of every state is run by Labor almost, but Tasmania, I believe, it's not necessarily because of that. I think it's just a general direction the world is going in. We are living in a time where we don't celebrate, these the things that make our countries great. We're living in a time where we are almost told to hate our countries and our way of life. And people might not see it so openly, but for someone that pays attention to a lot of the different facets of this, that's kind of how I view it. And we are being forced in many ways for people who are more patriotic in a way, or people who are more family oriented, or people who are more, concerned about the rights of the individual, to take more of our own stance for these things, and look after ourselves and look after our own communities, because it doesn't seem like it's coming from the government or the institutions who are broadly promoting these type of ideas. It's up to the individuals now to ensure that we protect certain rights, or we protect, when it comes to this, great example is this misinformation bill. That is almost supported universally by the major parties, even though they pretend that they don't. Like these, they all have their hands in this kind of stuff, and it really comes down again to individuals to oppose this type of thing. But you don't really see much opposition, sadly, from the media against it. You almost see support for it.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different elements like this where I sense that the next 5 to 10 years are really testing time for us in terms of our identity as Australians, or our identity as Westerners, because that's where we live in the West. We're a part of the Western, the Anglosphere, or whatever, however you want to term it. That's who we are, and a lot of that is being challenged. Almost every issue that comes up, whether it's issues around gender rights, whether it's issues around conflicts in the Middle East, they all somehow come around to challenging what we see ourselves as well as Westerners. Whereas I think in the past, we firmly knew who we were as a people. We knew who we were as Australians. And I think that's kind of been lost. And
Mm.
everyone's almost, yeah, it's a mishmash of everything. And, American pop culture, this is influencing us. This stuff from these other countries influencing us. It's crazy how it's become like this. That's just my read on it.
Yeah.
And it's a very kind of very surface level read, but that's how I feel about where we're heading.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that, like, especially coming from like the progressive side, there's this rejection of classic Western values and Western culture, and it's kind of seen as unpopular. And I'm sure some of that comes from pop culture and stuff as well. I don't know. Yeah, I'm kind of wondering, why do you think this is happening? What is the push that is causing this to happen? Is it organic, or um is it something to do with, I don't know. What are your thoughts?
It's kind of weird. Like I look at it as being a migrant. Like Sri Lanka, that's where my parents are from.
Yeah.
Has its own crazy issues. Had some crazy issues last year that made world news. But a lot of these countries that people migrate to Australia from, regardless of all the problems they have this way of maintaining their culture and their traditions and their history, and just these some of these kind of core values and principles that they have as people, and they maintain those things. And I'm not necessarily saying those things are good, but they maintain them because they believe those values are good. So in the West, we have these values where obviously it's been successful to some degree because you have people from everywhere else coming
Mm.
coming to for this same thing. And I truly believe that. I believe that people are coming to the West because it's better. Like, let's not pretend. Like, let's not pretend. If trust me, if my parents could live in Sri Lanka and have the same kind of standard of living as they have in the West, and the same rights and the freedoms and the same opportunities for their children, they would be living in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
Right. They would have never came here because, if you have all that in Sri Lanka, it's a wonderful paradise to live in.
Yeah.
Right. So the West has something different, which is these institutions that we've built, these practices that we have, the way that we treat each other, these secular societies that we have, the way that people feel free to express themselves. And these things are all good, but we kind of being told that some aspects of it are really bad and we should need to get rid of it. And I feel like the aspects they're telling us to get rid of are the ones that actually made it good in the first place.
Yeah.
Right. So we look today, when we look at freedom, we're looking at the freedom to be any gender that we want to be. Okay, that's the freedom that's been, especially by progressive. That's the freedom that's being pushed. They're like, oh well, that's freedom. We can do whatever we like.
Mm.
And I don't think that's always, of course, it's never always been the case. But we're replacing those type of freedoms with the most basic freedoms, like the importance of free speech,
Yeah.
which is something traditionally that we've always had. But now you have progressives saying, well, you have to limit free speech because it's impacting these other freedoms. But they don't understand, while they're doing that, it's actually creating societies where almost all those freedoms can disappear. in an instant. So we're going backwards in that way. And I don't know if it's shame, if it's guilt, if it's like we're too successful now in the West and we have to kind of, decolonize and do all these things because, of history and, like this kind of white guilt that I feel. I feel a lot of this kind of white guilt around me as well. A lot of people around me. I'm like, why aren't you guys proud of Australia? Like, I love Australia. Like, there's so many migrants that love this country. They're so proud of this country. And all of a sudden I have these white uni students telling me how much they hate this place and like you're a victim of all this kind of stuff. I'm like, what are you guys talking about? Like the average person that's living somewhere else right now, that's not their concern. Their concern is to live a decent life where they can provide for themselves and have a future. Like that's what most normal people are thinking about. But I feel like in the West, these a lot of these younger students, I'm just pointing at them right now, especially these uni students, they have everything. They have all of this stuff, and they're just like finding crap to complain about that makes really no difference to them. But they can complain about it from the luxury of using the very freedoms and conveniences that they're moaning about every second day. I mean, it's just a weird thing that we're witnessing, and I feel like sometimes the leadership, like Biden, for instance, these Democrats, these progressives, it plays into their hands for whatever weird reason, and they kind of let it happen. And it's just you might have seen on Twitter, there's like a staffer having
Yeah.
you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I
In
can't
the
even
Senate room
the
had
Senate
had
room, they're having some
yeah.
sort of romp with another guy, and
Yeah.
like this is kind of the world that this is devolved into. And so there's some people out there saying that they're celebrating this. They're saying, well, this love is love, and this is like what we should be doing, and stuff the government. Like it's crazy, man. Like I honestly think like what's happening into these countries. Like I'm fearful in the sense of the direction that these things are heading. And there are in these times other groups, people who have stronger senses of who they are, perhaps ideologies that aren't compatible with our Western way of thinking, that look to these scenarios and look to dominate. And that could be, for instance, countries like China, who don't have these type of problems. That could be many places in the Middle East that don't have these type of problems that we're having in the West right now. And they're also prospering as well, in their own ways. So all of this, I think plays into the West heading in a direction that, it's quite frankly not the same as we've been going on, at least since the end of the World War II.
Yeah, and I think you've kind of touched on something which I think is really important, is this idea of the way that freedom, that there's not kind of an appreciation for what freedom and liberty means and is, and like why they're all kind of connected, and why, for example, freedom of speech is the bedrock of all of it. Because when you let these whether it's university professors or the state or various branches or whatever it may be, redefine what freedom is, that's the easiest way to get rid of so much of it. That's when you say that freedom is this instead of this, and you teach it to university students or even high school students. I'm a high school teacher, so I see a lot of that as well. This kind of redefining of freedom. That's where so much of it is lost, and I think that's kind of it's important that there's voices like yourself and many other voices, and that's the kind of the battleground. That's the battleground that we're on right now. This is this idea of not just we need to defend freedom, because everyone can abstractly say, yeah, freedom's important, but what is freedom, right? That's the question, because we can all defend freedom, but if we all think it's something different, then we're actually destroying so much of it for so many people. And whether some people think freedom is the right to have free stuff free stuff, freedom, that's synonymous, right? And in fact that is actually extremely harmful in many ways. We are at the hour mark, so I think we better wrap it up. Was there any last message on anything that you wanted to share with our viewers today before we left?
No, nothing in particular. I think, lesson that I've learned throughout this time is obviously, um, the more people that can maybe talk like this, as in, share ideas with each other, it's great, I think. And we'll see more of that, obviously. But we're not seeing it sometimes in the more conservative or libertarian spaces. Potentially, more people are afraid, perhaps, to share their opinions because of how people around you might react to some of the things you're saying. But if you're so inclined and you believe you have something important to say, I think just speak up and say those things. and use these platforms that these companies have put out there. If you're worried about TikTok dancing and people doing all sorts of degenerate stuff on TikTok, go out there and change that and be a voice of something alternative to that and challenge those things that you see around you. I would love to see, I think, more and more of that in Australia. We're seeing that more, I think, in America and the UK. But it'd be great to have more, because I know there are people out there that have these views, and they're not bad views or wrong views. And even though society keeps telling you, you're like, you're right wing, or you're far left, or sorry, a far right, neo-Nazi baby or whatever it is, just for saying things like, oh, I respect freedom of speech, right? They're not bad things. So I think speak up and try to get out there and share these messages, and of course, continue to support people out there like the Collectivist podcast or myself and any other creators out there doing this kind of work. I think it's very important because we are up against it. We're up against many different organizations, institutions, governments, and all types of progressives and university students. The uni students themselves should motivate you, the far left uni students. I have nothing against uni students, but yeah, that should motivate you to get out there and spread messages of whatever it is that you believe. And I think it's very important.
Yeah, no, they for sure motivate me. And I think, yeah, you're right. Conservatives sometimes have a fear of speaking up, but I don't know what libertarians you've been talking to, because I can't get them to shut up about their views.
I mean, the libertarians are they're a bit annoying. But that's right.
Have no problem telling you what they think in most cases.
Yeah, that's true.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there for today. If you don't already, please follow us on Spotify, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Thank you very much for joining us, Rukshan. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we'll catch everyone later.